Zulu. So clearly at the time of King Dingane. And then to your right, you'll see the Maputo, whose chief at the time was Makasani. And Makasani and the Zulu, they had a very close relationship. They met daily to discuss strategy. And across this river, which is the Maputo River, there was a very busy ferry going back and forth, taking trade goods and distributing goods from the Maputo to the Zulu, like genitals and so on. Anyway, so if you go straight north, then there's Delagoa Bay, this big bay area over here. And above it is Shafina Grande, which is an island to which the governor fled. Across from the island, there's Magaya, who's another chief, who Governor Ribeiro thought would give him refuge. He didn't. Then I didn't put this in the map, which is an oversight, but sort of like the Zulu, right at the top, you'd have Shoshangan, and well, actually further north was his territory. Then you have Mashakane, the Matola chief, and then coming right back down, you'll see there's the Tembi, which is the Tembi land, from the Tembi River all the way to the coast, and 300 kilometers south, that was Tembi land. And then you'd see, the trading post and the fort. They were sort of next to each other. We don't know how far apart, but the governor was the head of the trading post, and Jose Nobre was the head of he was the agent for the company. So, and because of the company, because of Governor Ribeiro's attitude, the fort and the company came into huge competition over the slave trade. So at the time when Ribeiro arrives in 1829, was it October? Yes, October. He sort of came in at the end of a really, a mad, crazy slave trade, which means it was accelerated and intense. So this slave trade, like I said, implicates the Zulu army as well as the Maputo, who participated in this slave raiding. So Ribeiro quickly had developed two problems. The first problem was that he was running out of people to enslave, because the slave field, so to speak, was Tembi land. And so it was becoming depopulated because people were either being shipped off as slaves or else they were fleeing the area. And then the other problem he had was the saguate. I'll come back to saguate now. So he had to pay a saguate, and for the saguate, he needed goods, brass goods, beads, and some cloth. So the saguate was not a tribute. It's a Luso-Asiatic term. And what it was really, it was a custom in India where between two people of equal rank, gifts were exchanged. It was to build trust and to honor each other. And so Dingane at this time wanted his saguate because he was the highest authority in the land. And he wanted not only a saguate, but a very sumptuous saguate full of like a sizable amount of brass and beads and cloth. But I mean, cloth wasn't that important to this system. So it wasn't tribute. And every year, the secretary of the 12 Moons would arrive with his entourage, all glamorous with feathers and decked out. And he would come and inspect the saguate that the governor would have made ready, well prepared for him. He would inspect it and then declare it good enough or luxurious enough to commensurate with Dingane's title and status. The problem that Ribeiro had was that these goods came from Mozambique Island, which was technically their administrative center, but they in turn relied on Goa in India for these goods. And so because there's many a slip between the monsoon and the ship, these goods didn't arrive every year, but 3 years could go by without the goods arriving. So, which was a problem for Ribeiro. And so he would then tell the secretary, sorry, the ship hasn't arrived. But meanwhile, he's confiscating goods from the company's ships. So he did have goods, but he wasn't passing it on to Dingane. So why wasn't he passing it on to Dingane? Well, because he was looking for a new slave field, and he was pulling Shoshangan into the slave trade. So he was filtering goods to him rather than to Dingane. So the Portuguese provincial ship doesn't arrive. Eventually, the people at Delagoa Bay buy some goods and, very importantly, some gunpowder from an English ship called the Sandwich. Ribeiro doesn't bother to buy gunpowder. We don't really know why. Maybe he was too confident in his relationship with Shoshangan. Who knows? Anyway, so the Dom Miguel Primeiro arrives to the rafters with all the goods that Dingane wants. Also to note that Dingane had lots of spies at Delagoa Bay. So he knew what was coming in, what was going out, how much gunpowder the governor had, and how much of these goods were around. So Dom Miguel, like I said, the Portuguese ship arrives and offloads all these goods, and Ribeiro hides them. So again comes the request that Dingane wants his goods, and Ribeiro refuses to give him what is his due. He sends him like 6 pieces of black cloth, which is a real insult. So then what happens is he gets a message from Makasani, the Matola chief, saying the Zulu army is on its way. Subsequently, Ribeiro flees to Shafina, and things sort of deteriorate very quickly for him, and he's eventually killed. Then we fast forward 5 years to 1838, when Piet Retief arrives without a gift, because I mean, if you go and visit a chief, you bring a gift. I mean, it's just good manners. And he arrives without a gift, and he asks for a vast tract of land to settle in. Dingane is a patient man, as we've seen, because he's waited 3 years for his goods from Ribeiro, and he tells Retief to go and fetch his cattle from Sekanyela, which Retief does. But he also takes some horses and guns from Sekanyela. He gives Dingane the cattle, but he keeps the horses and the guns. So we must understand how important this is, because at the time, Dingane really wanted horses and guns. He was asking the missionaries for the same. He was asking for training for shooting lessons from the English in Natal, in Durban, at Port Natal, and no one wanted to help him. So he was surely thinking, well, this man wants all this land, he will give me some horses and guns, which Piet Retief didn't. So that's strike one. He didn't give him the very prestigious goods of horses and guns. Then strike two was when he comes back with the cattle. Well, when he first visits him, it's just him and I think 2 or 3 men. But when they come back with this little regiment of 70 men, and they proceed to give a demonstration of their equestrian and marksman skills, shooting and doing exactly what Dingane so wanted for his own army, which then would be perceived as a threat. And then with his strike 3 was when Dingane did have some horses, and they wanted to steal them, and they went around his village, his village, and at night. And in that culture, in Zulu culture, only wizards and evil people are around at night. So that would maybe explain why he shouted, "Kill the wizards," when he unleashed his men. Piet Retief didn't do very well in honoring Dingane, who was a leader who wasn't very secure in his position. He had usurped the title of kingship by killing Shaka Zulu. He wasn't fearful of them, of the 2,000 to 3,000 men, women, and children around the corner. He was more afraid of being betrayed because his army my brain's gone dead, sorry. For the army to gain the army's loyalty, he was very lax in the discipline. He let them go home, he let them get married, he didn't call them out on insulting people of higher rank, and he even had regiments defecting to Port Natal. So he was on very shaky ground in terms of his status and his authority. And with Piet Retief adding to that, chipping away at his authority and his status, he couldn't do anything else but execute him. And and he really needed the conspicuous goods to bolster his status and authority. And that's the end of my story.
Thanks, Linell. The usual rules apply. Please will you raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question. In fact, I'm going to ask Carolyn if she will start off, since she has put a question in the chat. Carolyn?
Oh, sorry, I just couldn't, I don't know why it wouldn't click to unmute. Well, thanks very much. Well, I'll just leave that question there. I'd rather take the opportunity to ask another question, if I may.
Yes.
Something that, first of all, I wanted to say how much I appreciate the work in reading these sources. And I think looking at Ribeiro and Retief together is a very interesting thing to do. However, I've got 2 points about your argument that I think would be worth getting into a little bit more deeply.
Mm-hmm.
The first is the amounts involved in the gift. You see, I do understand that the ability to redistribute prestige goods is of enormous significance. But what's the difference between the overall volume of the monopolizable trade goods that are coming into the Zulu kingdom and the gift? Because at one point you say that the givers of the gift were a bit annoyed that they got one tusk but gave double back in value.
Mm-hmm.
So that suggests a small amount in a gift. So I think a lot of the importance, the significance of your argument depends on the amount of goods that are involved. Is this a significant amount of the redistributed prestige items or a relatively insignificant amount? And that then leads me to a second question, if I may, which is a sort of linked one, which is you talk quite a lot about the Zulu King wanting his status acknowledged. And on the one hand, that creates the idea of a rather sort of oversensitive, perhaps slightly egotistical kingship. He may well, I'm thinking, be defensive of his dignity and want to perform and have a performance of power. But I imagine a king of this nature is probably making enormously complex political calculations all the time, and that the behaviors in relation to Ribeiro and Piet Retief are part of a complex political calculus, which takes into account all the factors that he and the king and his councillors considered germane at the time, rather than some sort of knee-jerk attempt at sort of wanting to have the appearance of bolstering status.
Okay.
And at certain points in the paper, you kind of start to allude to this, the dynamics of the complex political calculations that are driving a decision to murder, and then to perform the murder in quite a dramatic way. So I want to know what I think the configuration of the complex political calculation at each of those moments is, rather than seeing it as though the king is his dignity is insulted. I think kings having insulted dignity tends to be more in the performative realm. Though of course we know many do have, delusions or images of self that are concerned about that. But I would wonder about that. And so that relates again to, it goes back to the amount that's involved in these gifts, how significant it is.
I'm sure I've put it in the article. I can't remember the numbers, but it's like thousands of brass bangles and kilo, like I don't have the exact numbers, but if I'm going on the Secretary of the 12 Moons' judgment, and he judged it as just enough, and if they didn't have enough goods, they would add to it as best they can. I take your point about the complex political calculations that Dingane to make at the time, but I think what is of great importance is his insecure footing. He wasn't chosen as king. He took that, and plus he had Shoshangan as a threat. I think Shoshangan's roles may be a bit more clear in the slave article, but he was a threat because he was working with Ribeiro, and should he have vanquished, what's his name, Mashakani, then he would have been a very powerful man on the north side, and he would have taken all the saguate eventually, which would give Dingane very little or nothing to redistribute. So I think that the saguate was of great significance to Dingane's status and prestige because of that. He was threatened by Shoshangan, and which is, I think, a very important point to take into consideration.
But then isn't it a tax? Sorry to come back, Stephen, and I hope I may, because then I agree with you. It has to be very important. It has to be very important. But then we need to kind of, good sense of the scale. I was a bit disturbed by that business of being, 2 tusks worth. So I wanted more of the...
I think he misunderstood that. So how much is a tusk worth? What happened often is that either the trade post or the company would give a large amount of goods in brass and beads to Dingane. He would give 2 tusks maybe as the reciprocal gift, but they always complain that the gift they have to give is far more worth than the tusks. So yes,
okay, you did say double in the paper, but
double.
I mean
sometimes they say 3 times. Do you mean? So I think it is significant. And if you look at Dingane's hut being encrusted with beads, I mean, that would be a significant amount of beads. I mean, it wasn't just.
Would that be trade or would that be gift?
I beg your pardon?
Would none of that be from trade?
See, but that assumes that anyone could trade.
No. I mean, royal monopoly of trade. And
yes, but I'm saying it assumes that any person in the Zulu kingdom could come to the bay and trade. I know that.
I'm saying the fact that he's got all those beads the king has all those beads in his hut. Is that not because he was monopolizing trade?
Yes, but what I'm saying is the trade that happens is the saguate. There isn't he's not come sending people to Delagoa Bay to trade. He's sending people to fetch his present.
So it's a tax.
No, it's not a tax. It's saguate, which is an equal relationship that establishes honor and alliance between two parties. That's what a saguate is. It's not a tax.
Why would one establish honor and alliance between two parties?
Well, there's a huge literature around honor and between two parties doing business and being in each other's space.
But that's the point. That's what I'm trying to get at. It's the business part at the bottom of this.
Okay, so the business part is that the trade post and the company, they're the ones doing the business. They're doing the business in Delagoa Bay. Dingane is allowing them to do business.
Yeah. So it's a tax.
And no, it's not a tax. It's saguate. Saguate is different to tax.
This is I think a very illustrative discussion, actually, for our postgrads, especially about the importance of, well, this is the nature of academic debates and discussions. So I mean, if you want to come back here, Linell, I'd welcome you to. I have a couple of questions coming, and then we can also come back to Carolyn's other question just now, if you like.
Okay.
Okay, so let's go. We will come back to Carolyn's other question. Of course, if Carolyn wants to come back on this particular discussion, she's welcome to too at some point. Prudence.
Hi, Prudence.
Hi everyone.
Hello.
Hi. So, Linell, I'd like to commend you on the clarity of your paper. It was so easy to read.
Okay.
And yes. So my question is, under the section of sources and methodology, you did mention that the Portuguese sources that you used have significant limitations. So my question is, how did you overcome those limitations to create a scope of this history around the socio-political context of the Zulu Kingdom under Dingane's rule, and to further critically investigate events leading to the death of Governor Ribeiro? Thank you.
Okay, so I suppose it's limited because it's written from a purely Portuguese point of view, but I think what helps overcome that limitation was the subsequent inquiry into those events by also Portuguese people, but they weren't as invested in what was happening around Delagoa Bay. So I hope that helps.
Prudence? Prudence, do you want to come back? Let me unmute her. There we go.
No, that's it. Thank you. Thank you, Linell.
Okay.
So let's go to Amanda, another one of our postgrads. Amanda.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Hi, Amanda.
Thank you for the opportunity. And just like Prudence, I'd like to say your paper was quite understandable. It was not that difficult to read and to go through. So now I have quite a couple of questions, because the factors or the matters that you are highlighting are the factors that are not in the history textbooks. So as a history teacher, I'm so surprised to now understand that Retief was killed because he didn't get a proper gift. So now my first question, or should I explain the reason that is given in the textbook? So now in the history textbook of grade 10, the reason why Dingane is being killed is maybe related to the suspicions that Dingane had on Retief and his people. Now, I have quite a few questions. The first question is that I would assume that Ribeiro was also a white man, just as Retief was a white man. Now we have two distinct groups of white men. Retief is a white Afrikaner man who has moved all the way from the Cape to find settlement in the KZN Natal area. That was before the British actually managed to take over the KZN region as a colony to themselves. So now my first question will be, was it because maybe Dingane wasn't aware of the different groups of white people that existed? Because we have Ribeiro, who is Portuguese, we have Retief, whom I would assume didn't have as much wealth as Ribeiro, because he was just moving around. He had just come and he has found this place of settlement. Now the question would be, was Dingane even aware that these white people are not equal in terms of wealth? Nah, because the reason that is given to learners or to teach us as to why Dingane actually killed Retief is, it sounds as if he betrayed him, because Dingane, Retief, his purpose to go to Umkhongolevu was to go there with the intention of actually going there to sign a treaty. He was going there with the intention, we are going there, we are going to discuss, or they had been discussing about the share of land that Dingane was going to give to them. But then surprisingly, when they get there, instead of them signing a treaty, now Dingane is sending people or his warriors to say, Bambanla Batagati, kill the wizards. And then that's when Retief got killed. So now I'm not sure if I'm being clear, or because now I feel like the textbook is telling us this reason, and you were able to uncover that actually, no, it wasn't even a matter of they're going there to sign, it was because of the gift. So I'm a bit caught up between those two explanations, because now I wouldn't know which one to take or which one is which. Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda.
Well, thanks, Amanda. Whether Ribeiro was white is a good question. He might not have been. Not all Portuguese or people who were said to be Portuguese at Delagoa Bay were from Portugal, therefore white. They were often exiles. They were sent there because they had killed someone, stolen something, defrauded the government. They were often of Indian extract. And the reason why it makes it so difficult to know whether he was white or not is because once you're baptized into Roman Catholicism, the Portuguese would then give you a new Portuguese name. So it's very difficult to know who is black and who is white in this space. So he might as well, he could have been a dark colored person, we don't know. Then the other thing about the treaty, I mean, maybe you should read, there's J. Naidu, I quote his book called, I forget what it's called, J. Naidu's book, where he challenges the idea that a treaty was signed. So maybe look at that, Amanda. If you look at my footnotes, you'll find Jay's book.
It's tracking down historical myths.
There you go, tracking down historical, thank you, Stephen. Tracking down historical myths, and he discusses the treaty there. There's a lot of talk about the treaty, but no one's really found the treaty. So yeah, so that's a big question mark over the treaty. About wealth equality amongst white people, Retief, yeah, he was a bit of a sort of a shady figure. He owed lots of people money. He ran away from the Cape, basically. He wanted to get into trade. That's why he wanted to settle in Natal. I do know that lots of the trekkers who moved, east and north, they lost a lot of their wealth through raiding. People stole their cattle, their sheep and their goats. So they would start off with a lot, but they would end up with very little because they would be raided in return. So which then establishes this counter-raiding culture. I hope that helps, Amanda.
Thank you, Linell. So there's a couple more questions sort of coming through in the chat, and so Carolyn has asked another one. We have one from Paul Landau, and actually Tembisa is going to, I think I'll ask Tembisa to ask a question here, and then we can go maybe to some of the chats. I'm looking for more hands. Just raise your hand.
Thanks, everyone. I'm just so struck, I hope you can hear me. I'm so struck how the Indian Ocean connections just come through so very strong in this paper. And I've got two questions. One's a quick self-indulgent question that I might have asked you before, and that's about whether opium comes up in your sources as a good that might have been gifted or traded along with wine and beer. But for the second one, I was among a few of us who attended last night's WISH seminar, and your paper put me in mind of various fascinating strategies of wealth formulation made through manipulations and relationships within the spaces of political gaps and alliances and rivalries. And I've got Thomas McDowell's 2018 Ohio Press book in front of me. It's called Buying Time, Debt and Mobility in the Western Indian Ocean. And it shows connections through credit and speculation and trust and trade between Oman and Zanzibar, sort of heading down the Swahili coast and into the eastern region of the Congo River. So what I'm wondering is there any evidence in your Lisbon sources about the ways that Portuguese interactions with Arab and other Indian Ocean traders along the coast north of Mozambique Island might have influenced trade relations and then setting up various forms of time bargaining in the commerce relationships or in the tribute, well, I guess saguate relationships that you describe in your paper. Is there any further influence from just north along the coast?
Okay, so about the opium, no, there's no opium south. No, I haven't come across opium. And about Portuguese relationships along the north coast, I know very little about the north coast. I'm sorry. Yeah, I can't help you on that. But I'm sure, I mean, it makes sense that people the Portuguese would have had relationships and they had to do business, and they would do it at any cost and by any means. So yes, I'm sure there are quite significant relationships between the Portuguese and people on the Swahili coast, Zanzibar, and even further north.
Thanks, Linell. So I have Peter Delius and John Wright. I'm still looking for other hands. We will come back to Carolyn's questions as well. Peter?
Hi, can you hear me? Sorry.
Yeah.
Having been accused of being a reductionist very often in my life, it gives me great pleasure to be able to accuse other people of being reduction. On this occasion, I want to accuse Carolyn of being a reduction. I'm sure she'll take it in good part. But I think one of the things that Linell perhaps has been a little bit parsimonious with is her explanation of the deeper history of the saguate system in Mozambique. You know, it has a long history in the region, and it has many different dimensions. One obviously is that the parties are exchanging goods, and very often that exchange, in fact, is asymmetric, that more goods are going from the Portuguese than to them. But it's also very important in terms of statements about status. And I think we, of course, want to be very careful of underestimating the importance of status, particularly in competitive political environments, where a number of people are jockeying for leadership and attempting to assert themselves as a dominant leader. So the importance about saguate is that, of course, it has a particular material dimension which may be asymmetrical, It is a formal statement of status that I, the governor of Mozambique, a man of power and position, recognize you, Dingane, king of the Zulu, as the dominant power in the interior of the person that I'm dealing with. So the scale of the saguate has a really important symbolic dimension. If you're Dingane and you're getting a smaller saguate than Shoshangani is getting, then that's a serious blow to the public expression of your status. But let me not talk on Linell's behalf. I'm sure she can explain the system much better than I can.
Thank you.
Linell, do you want to come back before we move on?
No, I think Peter's helped me out there a bit. I do often forget that people haven't read the things I've read. Yeah, so the saguate, I see Paul's also asked a question about the saguate and not being tribute. And he says something about the Indian, it was an Indian concept brought by the Portuguese.
That's actually Carolyn, I think. Yeah, Carolyn. But it's Carolyn's
Carolyn.
Carolyn's really.
Oh, Carolyn. Sorry, Carolyn,
Paul
it's yours.
Paul asked a
Yes.
question about the symbolic significance of
Oh,
the
yes.
pie.
Oh, sorry,
Yeah.
Carolyn, it's your
But
question.
Carolyn's asking really about, I presume the answer is we don't know what the Zulu term was, or we can speculate.
Well, I want to come back to something else before that, and it's about the Indian concept brought by the Portuguese. I'm not sure that the Portuguese did bring the concept over, because I'm looking at a far earlier history where it looks like there was Muslim Indian influence on that coast long before the Portuguese arrived. So which would make the saguate even more significant, seeing how far back in time this idea was around. In the document I read, the writers calls it, well, after all of this happens with Ribeiro, and Dingane asks for another saguate, because he says the first saguate was the saguate of war. So maybe he used the same word, I don't know. And then he says, and this saguate he's wanting now is the saguate of friendship. So, and also I've spoken to John Wright, hi John, about the secretary of the 12 moons, and he said he doesn't know of a Zulu term for this person. So I really don't know. There's a simple answer.
Actually, let's go straight to John. He was next on the list. I'm still looking for a couple more hands. We might have time for a few more questions. John?
Oh, okay, more broadly first. Linell, thanks for an intriguing paper.
Thank you.
My face on the screen. You know, we've discussed it before. And yeah, you've introduced a novel, and I think very important element into discussion of the history of this area. It's undoubtedly true that the materialist historians haven't paid enough attention to issues of honor, prestige, and so on. But at the same time, I think you do tend to underplay the broader political dimensions that Dingane is operating in.
Okay.
A simple question that arises is, what changes take place in the Zulu kingdom between 1833 and 1838?
Okay.
It's 5 years. 5 years is a long time in politics. Just to cite Harold Wilson, and even certainly in the Zulu kingdom, things were changing all around.
Yeah.
So I think you do need to pay much more attention to that sort of dimension. And then just a comment on saguate itself. Again, what changes take place in the expectations? Look, can there be a real relation of saguate if relations of power are so asymmetrical as between Dingane on the one hand and the Portuguese fort on the other? Okay, the Portuguese may not know that the relations are asymmetrical, but suddenly they found out very quickly in 1833, who has the upper hand. Surely that kind of event changes expectations as well about what is entailed in this notion. Thanks.
Expectations for whom?
for the
Who's it?
Portuguese.
Expectation from Portuguese.
No, I mean, they've learned that they don't have the power that they thought they might have, you know, with
Yeah.
the killing of the governor.
Okay.
Dingane can intervene in a big way. So what
Yes,
does that, what
it-
effect does that have on their relations? You know, on their, no, not on their relations, just on their conceptualization of saguate, which goes back a very long way, you say, but surely again, that changes over time.
Yeah, no, it does. It does change. Well, yeah, it's a complex issue, the saguate, in terms of change. I just want to address the 5 years that you were talking about. So during that 5 years, Dingane is losing support of his army. I mean, he has a regiment like deserting him and going to the English in Port Natal. Eventually, his army deserts him completely and is killed by the Swazi. So he doesn't have the loyalty of his army as he should have. And he's always cutting them slack, which Shaka would never ever have done. So he needs this glamour to prop up his status. Then about the asymmetry, you said that the Portuguese didn't understand the symmetry. I think it's Dingane who didn't understand the asymmetrical relationship. He doesn't care that they're not making a profit up in India. He wants what he wants. And if he sends them 2 tusks that are worth twice or 3 times the amount of goods they're giving him, then it's not his problem. And plus, for them to get the beads and the brass isn't that much of an outlay. But eventually, if you don't honor your creditors, you run into debt. And if you're giving out more than you're getting in, then you have a problem eventually. So I hope that answers your question. And how does it affect the Portuguese? Well, they keep on paying saguate. And also Ribeiro isn't the first governor to be killed. Lupe Cardenas is also killed for different reasons. But I mean, killing governors, I think, should have happened more often, but it didn't, because the leaders around the bay and further south and north are dependent on these goods. Otherwise, they would have wiped them out completely. They outnumbered them like 10 to 1,000 anyway. So the only power the Portuguese had was these goods.
Very interesting, Linell. I'm still looking for any other hands, and Carolyn has put a bunch of very interesting comments. I will actually send you the chat, Linell, which I'm sure you find useful. I can do that afterwards. So I was going to insert myself here, if I may. I think it's really, I thought Amanda's question really opened up a series of interesting thoughts about the nature of colonial power as revealed in this piece. And I mean, you know, it strikes me that Amanda's putting her finger on something when she asks how Dingane is perceiving a Portuguese man or a man of Portuguese heritage, and
maybe not.
and Retief, yeah, or maybe not, yeah. But it's a very interesting, of course, you know, in the kind of historiography of the African continent more broadly, Philip Curtin used to say that there were these schools, you know, these different approaches to colonialism that you could kind of point to and say, well, the Portuguese had a very different approach to the British and the French, etc., etc. So, you know, it's tempting to read this piece through that lens, but I actually, in some ways, think part of what's refreshing here is that you kind of leave that open. I suppose if I had to ask a question, it would be to invite you to reflect a little bit on the nature of colonial power as you see it in this early phase. It seems very fragile. I mean, that's one thing that this emphasis on saguate invites, I think, from us, which is a sense of the precariousness, actually, of the presence and of the complexity of the relationships, including, of course, the fact that, as appears at various points in your text, there are Africans who are being enrolled in slave raiding at various points, and as soldiers on the side of the Portuguese, and etc. So there's a lot of complexity in here, which is certainly to be appreciated. And if you want to answer, that's just an invitation to, if you want to say more about the nature of colonial power here. But Paul Landau's question about the significance of the removal of the heart and liver, I mean, maybe it's self-evident, but do you want to say what you would like to say, and I'll see if there's another question here.
Well, it doesn't really say what it is, but if you go on other examples of people being chopped up into pieces, and they bury them in the way that they've come to prevent other people from coming the same way. So it could be that. Then about colonial power, yes, they were very weak. That's why I'm amazed that not more Portuguese people are killed all the time. They're very badly provisioned. They often don't have the gunpowder they need if someone should attack the fort. And it wasn't even a fort, it was like a mud hut sort of situation. It was really dismal. So yes, colonial, I don't think you can talk about colonial power at this point at all.
Sure. There's a question from Karen Harris. I was going to tack one last one on, which is, can women be saguate? I mean, I think in the case of Tetsuayo, there's a famous example in, I'm forgetting whose book, where you know, Zulu wives are given in some form as something like saguate. I mean, I'm leaving that open as a question. And then Karen Harris has just asked about the role played by Anselmo José do Nascimento. My Portuguese is not...
Nascimento. Okay. So, what were we talking about? The saguate to women. I am sure that if a woman had a really important, if she was the leader, which I don't think often happened in this period of time, she would have received it.
No, I meant more women as saguate.
Oh, women as saguate.
Yes. Yeah.
Women are given, I know early on women were given, they were called queens, and they were given to the soldiers. So they would arrive to Delagoa Bay, brought on board ships naked, and they would leave with clothing after giving the sailors some fun. And then they would come back again naked and then leave with clothing. So I don't know whether you can, I don't think that's called saguate because it's a different type of relationship. But yeah, that's how women, but there's a lot more to be done about women in Delagoa Bay.
So last question, I think, from Karen Harris. Karen, you want to ask your question yourself?
Oh, Nascimento.
Sorry, if I could just come in here very quickly now. I just want to make a confession. This is not my wise comment out there. It's actually on behalf of one of my postgrad students who's been doing research on this, and he used the work of O.J. Ferreira, which I'm not sure whether you're aware of it. The pity is that Ferreira the late Professor Ferreira only published his work in Afrikaans, and he was also, you know, able to read the Portuguese stuff. And it'd be interesting for me to sort of hear your comment, because obviously my student's been using his work as well. You know, and what I read in your, you know, paper, what you'd said about this Jose Anselmo or whatever, compared to what Ferreira's saying. And there's a very different take on that. I mean, there's something about cannonballs and, you know, trying to outdo each other and so on and so forth. So I just thought it'd be interesting if you could also look at that and bring that into the equation.
Cannonballs, yeah, the cannonballs. So that's a cute story. I haven't, in which book of Ferreira's is that? Anyway, we can come back to that. So yes, so Nascimento Anselmo, he's an interesting character. He was at Delagoa Bay long before, and he had a big fight with the previous governor, and he's then shipped off. He leaves. He's who saves him? I think it's the English, because in Owen's W.F.W. Owen, you know, the surveyor person went to Delagoa Bay to survey the bay, and he had to do all of the east coast of Africa. He comes across the same Nascimento, and Nascimento gives Dingane a saguate because he wants to hunt in his territory, but he gives him very fine small beads. So then there's a communication between Dingane and Ribeiro where he says, you need to give me the same saguate, the same quality saguate as Nascimento. Otherwise, I will put him in your place and he can be the governor of Delagoa Bay. So that comes back to the whole who's equal in relationship in terms of the saguate. And then Ribeiro says, well, the only beads I have for you are these cannonballs, implying violence. So that's how he insults, that's how he threatens him by saying, you want beads? I'll give you beads. I'll attack you with my cannon. Does that help?
Right, I don't know if Karen wants to come back. Amanda just says here, maybe Dingane underestimated the strength and prowess of the Voortrekkers. Because of course,
he wanted that. I mean, he aspired to have his men have the same prowess in equestrian skills and being able to shoot as well. He wanted that. He asked help, like I said, from the missionaries and the English at the coast, and no one wants to help him with that.
All right, absolute last comment or question from John.
Okay.
Well, just by way of comment, on Dingane's reign, I don't think we know enough about it, quite honestly, for you to make the kind of generalizations that you were making. They need to be strongly qualified. Dingane retains power right up until 1838, military power. Maybe some elements of his army are moving off, others not. We tend to forget that the Voortrekker victory at Ngome in 1838 didn't lead to the fall of the Zulu kingdom. It led to a stalemate, in fact. And Dingane was well able to survive, in fact, almost defeat the Boers in a running battle after that.
Yeah.
And then even when the Mpande's rebellion takes place in 1839, a large portion of the army still remains loyal to Dingane and actually travels with him further north up to Swaziland. So yeah, I think just be careful about underestimating Dingane's with and political position too sweepingly. You've got to feel this out.
Then why is he abandoned and left to be killed? If he had all these loyal people around him, why was he left to be killed by the Swazi?
I'm not saying he had all these loyal people around him. He had some. Some were drifting away. Dingane is actually killed by the Swazi in the absence of some of his raiders. He's trying to establish himself further north with the help of the army that's remained with him. Once that's happened, well, then his support, just disintegrates. People go back to giving their loyalty to Mpande or wherever else. Others of them may have gone off to Soshangane, Ziligazi, whoever. His reign just hasn't been examined in enough detail.
No, I agree. But it's just the SS papers sort of paint a picture of him being abandoned by his followers. But you're right, we need to do a lot more work on that.
Well, I think it's to your credit, Linell, that you have, again, given us such a fascinating paper. It's tremendous that you're able to bring new sources into the historiography. And I'd like to think that some of our students have taken inspiration from this. And thank you for doing it while not feeling 100% either. So thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
And thanks to everyone for joining us. We hope to see you. We will see you hopefully in a couple of weeks. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Bye.